Dystopia warning, obviously. Yeah, I'm back. Back again. Tansky's back, tell a friend, etc., And I've decided to ease myself in gently, like I do with your mum, by talking to you today about the far right. You know the far right, those lads that are stood outside hotels like disgruntled tourists, claiming that they're all about protecting our women's. Or in the case of the EDL, don't touch the kids, that's our job. Well, according to recent data, they're more likely to be wife beaters than protectors. I, for one, am shocked. I thought this was a new wave of feminism. All those big titty pork dads letting loose their bras and burning them for the cause. I thought their ultra-violence and their alliance with the far right was a vehicle through which they could express to the world just how much The Handmaid's Tale changed their perspective on shit. But now it turns out it had absolutely nothing to do with that at all. In fact, whilst they were busy smashing the living daylights out of the police and grieving communities, their alienated, unfulfilled, unfilled wives and girlfriends were just getting the night off. Yeah. So it's time for me to get my facts out for the lads. Kryptonite for reform voters and the far right of facts. And also, inevitably, pointing out the reality of their actions is going to make my comments section flypaper for cunt. Because it turns out the far right aren't a fan of women talking. Oh dear, they're going to hate me then, aren't they? Now, the article that I'm using as a reference for this today was a recent Guardian article. Something that's already been scoffed at by these people on social media because they don't understand how journalism works. No, they think that the news comes from Facebook memes that tell you brown people are trying to steal your poppy or bang Christmas, etc. Well, it turns out that 2 in 5 arrested for last summer's UK riots had previously been reported for domestic abuse. Something that any woman with half a brain cell could already predict. I grew up in Essex. I know this kind of man. I know the kind of men that are at Epping protests. The men who pretend that their violence on the streets comes out of concern for women and girls are the same type of men who, with a cigarette in one hand and a stale pint in the other, would try it on with me when I was as young as 14. The kind of men who, in an attempt to give their racism and their pitiful insecurity some form of legitimacy, have jumped on this bandwagon. Now, this is data that was obtained by The Guardian through a Freedom of Information request, and the figures are damning. It shows that 41% of 899 men arrested for taking part in violent disorder in July and August of 2024 had been previously reported for domestic abuse and other crimes associated with intimate partner violence. These offences towards women include actual bodily harm, grievous bodily harm, stalking, sexual assault, controlling coercive behaviour, breaching of non-molestation orders. And for those arrested by one particular police force, the stats were as high as 68%. From Freedom of Information requests sent to 21 police forces, covering the 27 towns and cities where violent disorder took place in Britain, identified as sites of significant disorder in a House of Commons briefing in September. Between the 30th July and the 7th of August 2024, an estimated 29 anti-immigration protests took place in Britain, sparked in response to the Southport attacks in which 3 young girls were killed. Sparked also by shocking amounts of online disinformation, which was pushed by well-known misogynists like Andrew Tate and then repeated by far-right politicians like Nigel Farage, and then further inflamed by Twitter edgelord Elon Musk, who took a little bit of time off with compensating for his tiny knob by pushing online disinformation designed to spark unrest and disorder in Britain. Many of these protests were violent, with participants attacking mosques, random members of the public that didn't look quite British to them, aka were not white. And of course they also targeted hotels that housed asylum seekers, even though the perpetrator of the crime in Southport was British. In Bristol, where there were 60 arrests, more than 2/3 of those arrested had been the subject of a previous domestic abuse report. In Hartlepool, Middlesbrough, 107 arrests, 44 of those had also been subject to a previous report. In Rotherham, where rioters set fire to an asylum hotel, 75 people were arrested, 35 of them had been reported to the police for domestic abuse. Joshua Lane, a 27-year-old former serviceman, was arrested. He threw missiles at police guarding the asylum hotel. He had previously received a suspended sentence for stalking, battery, and criminal damage. There were 91 arrests in Sunderland. Rioters set fire to cars, attacked mosques. 38 had been previously reported. One of the first arrests in Merseyside happened because the suspect was recognised by police as having been reported by a woman for violence. Merseyside police arrested 160 people after days of disturbances in Liverpool, but didn't provide The Guardian with information because, according to them, the costs were too high. However, Gareth Metcalfe, described as being at the forefront of the disorder in Southport, had previous convictions for sexual assault and for failing to comply with a non-molestation order. There are more. I could go on. I've got pages of notes of this. I feel it's a good idea to give an honorary mention before I move on to Ethan Armstrong, 26, from Hull, who was arrested for violent disorder and jailed for it. What was his previous? Well, he was convicted of ABH, wasn't he? After repeatedly punching his ex-girlfriend. He'll be popping up as one of the new, Shitler Youth reform counsellors soon, I imagine. James McMurdoch was able to stand, but James McMurdoch's lost the whip now. Not for kicking his ex-girlfriend, no, but for fraud, allegedly. Because according to reform, kicking in your girlfriend's fine, but stealing money, This proves what every woman already knows. A correlation between violent disorder, domestic abuse, and how it's a part of a wider pattern of male violence. And class also plays a part here. Most charged come from the 20% most deprived places in Britain, which proves that reform's approach is working. They're following the Trump playbook, targeting people with lower educational outcomes, those that are more likely to be deprived and therefore think the immigrant is stealing their cookie, or in this case, stealing their right and their ownership over women. Yeah, because, it's not a foreigner's job to beat and attack British women. It's the job of British men, isn't it? The same men that cheer on these lynching events dressed up as protests are the same men that are cheering on Tommy Robinson for doing that, allegedly, to a man at a station in London. I don't know what's more puzzling here. How a tiny little hobbit like Robinson allegedly sparked out a fully grown man, or why so many self-proclaimed ultra-hard alpha males are so desperate to be a sub for the world's smallest dom. It's giving harder daddy, isn't it? They all claim to care about women and children, yet stand shoulder to shoulder with white pedos like Trump, men who beat their wives, and their diminutive hero who calls a woman a slag for asking about his supposed assault before he gets on a tiny little helicopter and flies out of the country. Must be quite hard to keep tabs on him, considering he's fucking tiny. It's also important to point to a Project Starlight report, a joint report undertaken by the Home Office and Counter-Terrorism Police in 2021. It analysed 420 individuals that were susceptible to online or vulnerable to online radicalisation or radicalisation broadly. 39% of them had a link to domestic abuse, and that is much higher than the public at large. And these are the ones that are reported. Most women don't report it because of repercussions. I mean, the men that were involved in these riots were free to be on the streets, so what the hell were they doing to their exes or their girlfriends that had dared to report them? Because inaction by the justice system only makes perpetrators bolder, gives them a sense of impunity to continue being violent. Now, this disinformation about asylum seekers is rooted in white supremacy. It has political and ideological intent. Far-right myths about black men, brown men touching white women has been used in propaganda since the dawn of time to justify lynchings. And what would spark lynchings? Allegations that they'd dared to touch a white woman, or they'd murdered someone, and then it would be pitchforks, and it would be being dragged behind cars or hung off the side of buildings. And we're seeing similar here. Just the other week, an Asian man was being chased through Canary Wharf. Men were chasing after black men in mobs in Epping at those hotel protests, right? Protests that were all about local concerned mums and dads, really. Is that why Callum Barker was there? Member of the proscribed organisation, the Homeland Party. That why people were turning out in balaclavas, is it? Noel Gallagher's brother was charged with really serious crimes. Does that mean there's going to be riots at the next Oasis gig? No, for two reasons. One, he's white. Two, Oasis aren't responsible for his actions. Just like how every single person in an asylum seeker hotel is not responsible for the actions of one person. And what are you seeing online in response to this? People literally calling for asylum seekers now with their entire chests and their name visible to be gassed. As this article has proven, which I will go into more detail about tomorrow, this isn't even about culture or class. This is about men. Men of all races, all cultures, all religions. Because there is a male violence epidemic. And this lot don't care about justice for women. If they did, where are they at the women's rights protests or the vigils? No, they want justification. They want to use our trauma, our pain, our bodies as props in their fascist pantomime. They're using crimes that are routinely inflicted on us by men exactly like them. You can't claim you're protecting women while simultaneously being under investigation for assaulting them. It's not a protest, it's a perpetrator's parade. Like most women, I was first harassed by men in a predatory way when I was still in a school uniform. We have to learn to fend off men that look exactly like him when we're children. Men from all walks of life, from all professions. As Giselle Pellico said, the everyday man. Most are white, not a far-right stereotype of some swarthy foreigner standing around outside a school with a fucking butterfly net. And the more that the media normalises this, the more that government ministers, Labour government ministers, legitimise this, the worse it's going to get. Because what they're doing by saying that they have a reason to be upset, they don't, it's hysteria. What they're doing is they are essentially legitimising men that are violent towards women whilst claiming that they want to halve violence against women and girls in the next 10 years. That's not enough. These are men that are devoid of personality or imagination and therefore have to use a national flag to give them one. National flags that they give one. Men that think that they're alpha males, fighting for a cause, when in fact they're just little subs for their daddy billionaires who sit rubbing their hands in glee in private members club, marvelling at the division and hate that will give them untold wealth and power. They're just giving their labour for free on the streets, radicalised by upper class holes who sit there and will easily sink in scotch of an evening their entire weekly wage or universal credit payment. This is the living embodiment of the immigrant stole your cookie meme. And none of this is about protecting women, because when I call it out online, they're happy to call me a slag and tell me that I need to be disciplined for daring to have a point of view. I would be scared, but I doubt many of them have seen their own dicks in a decade, and they've probably all got bigger tits than me. And I don't mean to brag, but I'm rocking D cups, and I am so fucking sick of thick men who give nothing positive to society telling me who my predator is when they're my predator. Anyway, feels good to be back. And if you have made it this far and you like what I do, feel free to click on the subscribe, because there's more where this came from. Till next time, don't believe the bullshit. Resist this.